Good evening and welcome to the March 5th TRICOM meeting. I'm going to open the meeting. Before we get started, Laura said you had a quick announcement.
I do have a quick announcement for all of the TRICOMs that are here. Thank you for coming. The school committee is having an April 15th workshop about social media and how to, as an elected official, how to use it. We're having one of our consultants come in from the Massachusetts Association for School Committees. I have asked her if I could open it up to a larger group, and she said yes. So I don't have a room yet, but it'll be time. I think FinCom's probably meeting. It's a Wednesday, but if anybody can make it, we would love to have you. I think it'd be really useful for all of us as we navigate the tricky ways of social media. So I just wanted to invite you all, and we would love to have you.
So if we're interested, do we RSVP to you?
I will send out once I can send out an email, or you can just RSVP, or you can just come.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
I would love to have you guys.
Thank you. All right. So Jay's going to start, right?
Yeah, I think I will. We had a last minute
Change?
decision, I guess.
Oh, okay.
I do expect Jay to talk a lot longer than me, but I do want to thank you all for coming and thank the audience and cable TV that'll broadcast this. The chairs of the tri-board, we've had a number of meetings since the 18th, and I appreciate the support that you've given us as Jay and I and Dan and Becca have worked through the proposal and the recommendation that we've given you. In terms of format for us, I thought I would give you the overview. You all have the memo, you all have the presentation material. I thought I could just talk in general terms and let Jay talk and or Dan, and then if we want to get into the presentation that Becca has, it's difficult, even though this room was designed to really get everybody to visually see everything. We printed out the presentation, so we don't have access because we're not at a table where we can do it. But we could always move Becca to that spot if we wanted to go over the slides. So on the 18th of February, the Select Board asked for recommendations and scenarios for an override. We met up until yesterday with the three chairs of the Select Board, School Committee, and the Finance Committee to come up with the document that you now have in front of you. Our presentation, our recommendation deals with a request, our recommendation for a $3.2 million override. It deals with $1 million of that will go to capital. The remainder will go between the town and the school to help with operations. And maintaining current status quo inside the operating budget and inside the school department budget. Providing for the capital, it's important that we get a lot of discussion around the backlog of capital, not fully vetting all the pieces that are on the plan, and then not really having sufficient funds to do that. So we came up with a recommendation around the needs of municipality, the needs of the school department, and we had in the back of our minds what people were used to in the past from 2014, because you remember when we had the meeting at the high school, for those of you who were here, we talked about a number that we thought people might support, and we got to that number, and we all walked out of that meeting where we were going to support an override for the roads and for the schools, and that was supposed to last 5 years, and we had those projections, and this is our seventh budget cycle. So we should all be proud of ourselves for getting through 7 cycles. It's just now, certainly 2022 looks so much worse than 2021, so we have some breathing room, if you will. But consistent level of service in the town and school. The fire department study is a critical component to the option for the override for the municipality. We've been blessed with a fire department that will go into a burning building for under $20 an hour for a long time. And those people are getting older. Unfortunately, they will age out at some point, and we need a succession plan to get other people to run into those burning buildings. We've had the study done. We know we need leadership positions to start, and then we need to continue to retain and attract either full, part-time, combination, call, whatever the answer is to fulfill that need. We need money to do those things. So this allows for capital, as I mentioned, and we also have replacement of police vehicles that have been in and out of the budget as an operational item. We'll be adding that back in if we were lucky enough to move forward with an override. So all of those funding pieces, and we have a list broken out in terms of what we would restore from a municipal perspective. The school department obviously has what they would restore and not reduce if they got what they needed. But obviously, everything we're talking about today is subject to town meeting approval, once or if a ballot question were to be passed. In the document that you have for the recommendation, we looked at October 27th as our recommendation. You are the leadership and the lightning rod of this community, and you have direct access to what the people's will is. So again, it's a recommendation based on the best thinking of the three chairs and staff in terms of providing outreach. Knowing numbers relative to the SAFER grant was the second piece, and the new growth ends June 30, so we'll have a better handle on those three things. That's why we chose October 27th. So those are the highlights. I'm hoping Jay can talk about the money that is in this proposal that'll restore some sense of balance for fiscal '21 and adding one position a year for the 5 years that we believe this 3.2 will get us through moving forward. And I never said this at the beginning, but obviously Q&A, obviously up to the chair, but we'll take questions at the end if Jay wants to talk about his piece of that particular memo. And then Becca can do that presentation piece. Relative to the cost to the average taxpayer, with this scenario, we're still competitive compared to our sister communities. I say that, but I hope there's an asterisk I can put in a newspaper someplace. Other communities change and do things all the time. They might have an override, they might have an underride. Hopkinton just voted an underride recently, right? Something to that effect. So things change based on value, new growth. There's a lot of variables. So we might be fourth from the top now. We might be second from the top if we did this. We could be second from the bottom. There's a lot of variables with other communities. So, but competitively for what we pay in taxes compared to others, we're still in the middle of the pack with this proposal. So we were conscious of that when we made the recommendation to you. So having said that, I'll let Jay come up unless you have particular questions for me. I'll be happy to answer those now, or we can wait.
Madam Chair, can I make a recommendation, because the Finance Committee has been feeding me with a list of stuff for the last day. Can I recommend that we talk about the FY21 budget issues first, and then discuss the need for an override and get some agreement on that, go into the amount for an override, get some agreement on that, and then talk about timing and logistics, just to kind of structure the conversation so that we're a little bit organized.
Are you guys okay? I mean, they've worked on this. I mean, they came up with the
Does
plan
that work for
to.
you guys? It's just,
Yeah,
we have
well,
some concerns
sure.
that we would like to, it's up to you, but we have some concerns that we'd like to sort out for the current budget year that would feed into potentially the discussions around the override, so it would help us to organize it that way.
Fine.
Is that all right? Okay. So one of the main concerns that we've had is around cannabis and the cannabis revenue and how that goes into the FY21 budget, how it gets carried forward into the forward years. We've obviously sent you guys a memo. There was some discussion about it the other night, but there wasn't any decision made on it. So if there's anybody on Finance Committee that wants to speak about it, now's the time. But we would feel better if we had a decision on whether that revenue is going to go into the budget or not, because it impacts the override numbers, it impacts the discussions about timing on the overrides as well. So it's an important point for us, and we don't feel like we've really gotten a resolution on it.
Yes, go ahead.
I guess in reading this proposal right here, they've recommended an October 2020 override ballot, and the cannabis then would we have a better knowledge of what that would bring in. So that would, I think, address what your concerns have been.
It doesn't. So what's being proposed in the FY21 proposed budget, Finance Committee doesn't consider a balanced budget. We don't have confidence based on the discussions that we've had or anything that we've heard subsequently in any of the discussions that the cannabis money is going to come in. And so we feel like if we're going into, a proposed budget that we're all vetting, that it's not actually a balanced budget if we don't have a realistic expectation that we're going to see those revenues coming in this year. So that's our, go ahead.
if the $3.2 million amount factors in $300,000 worth of cannabis, then I don't think the 3.2 million is enough, because I don't think the $300,000 is a reasonable number. So, to me, the budget is out of balance by $300,000 even before the fiscal year starts. And waiting until October, if you're gearing it on $3.2 million, you're gonna have a $300,000 problem in October, because I don't think that money's gonna exist in fiscal '21. And I think that's a concern that the finance committee has with that
Madam
number.
Chair? Then I think the superintendent and the town administrator have to leave right now and figure out how they're gonna cut $300,000 from our budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
What do you mean it doesn't change the number?
So 3.2, whether or not we get, do I need to?
Okay, you're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
mic'd.
come on up.
You're not mic'd.
So just to clarify, the recommendation that we're making for October, as it's recommended now, we are assuming that we are going to get the 300,000 in FY21. If we don't get the 300,000, it does not change the whole override number. The whole override number stays at 3.2. It just impacts the amount that has to be raised in the first year to overcome the $300,000 shortfall as a result of not getting the marijuana revenue.
so then,
Because-
I'm sorry if I
Yeah,
can interrupt, so
yeah.
then the 5-year number of 3.2, you're gonna have a shortfall if your projections carry through. You'll have a $300,000 problem in the final year because you're gonna be using $300,000 more dollars in the first year. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, you won't be short in year 5.
How?
Because the school department's number fluctuates year to year. It's not a flat rate. It goes up and it goes down. You got to remember you get 2.5% on every dollar that you raise in the previous year. So if you raise more in year 1, people's taxes go up more in year 1, but you also get more in year 2 because you get 2.5% on top of that 830 that you raised.
That's not correct, because you're raising the levy permanently in the first year by 3.2. And every year thereafter, the 2.5% gets added on that 3.2. Doesn't matter what you raise in the fiscal year, it's the levy limit that goes up 2.5%. Unexpended tax capacity has nothing to do with the 2.5% you raise the next year.
But if you raise that 300,000 in '21, because the override, you push the levy limit higher by $3.2 million.
Yep.
You get 2.5% on that additional 300,000.
But you're also spending $300,000 in that first year on operating costs that isn't gonna be there in future years, because now it's already being targeted for something that you had the $300,000 in cannabis targeted for. Does that make sense?
The 2.5% is on the 3.2 million.
Correct.
It has the amount that you levy within the levy capacity has no impact on the levy limit increasing.
That's correct.
But the levy limit increases every year by town meeting vote. Would you agree with that? And my second question
No,
is
the levy
this.
limit increases
No, the
automatically by the formula in Proposition 2.5.
The levy limit, so if
If
you're.
you cut the budget today, the levy goes down.
No, it
The
doesn't.
tax, of course it does.
The
levy and the
tax
levy limit
levy
are two
goes
different
down, the
things.
levy limit does not. Because
All right, so what are you driving at?
what I'm saying to you is, you have, say you have $20 million levy limit.
Yeah?
You're gonna increase it by $3.2 million. So now your levy limit is $23.2 million. In the first year, you're gonna spend $20,300,000, okay? Because now you're gonna have to spend that extra $300,000 in that first year. So now your expenditure, your budget is going to increase now, because that $300,000 is going to be compounded every year thereafter.
Yeah.
Your levy limit is already gonna be set in fiscal year '21 if that $3.2 million override passes in the first year. So what I'm saying, by year 5, you're gonna have a $300,000 problem. That cannabis money should not be counted in any stretch of the imagination in fiscal '21. Now, if in fiscal '22 it comes into fruition, and it comes into being, then that's fine. Then now you have it going down the line. But in fiscal '21, you're gonna have a problem. If the override doesn't pass, you're gonna have a $300,000 problem, period, right? Because you don't have that money in the first year.
Well, to answer the original question, I believe the money should be in the budget. I do not agree with your, that it is not a balanced budget. We have town staff that has projected revenue for 12 years and has projected always conservatively. We've always met our revenue goals. And you keep talking about a 300,000 chunk, that assumes that nothing is raised. So I just disagree. So in my opinion, the 300 stays in.
Okay. But I mean, similarly, Jen, though, we had this conversation surrounding UPS money a couple of years ago. And, my recommendation at the time, and this was just not in the budget, but it was in projections. And we sort of had the same conversation. It was recommended by staff that it remain in the projections because that's what they foresaw happening. And ultimately, it didn't happen. It wasn't their fault. It was through no fault of their own. But here, similarly, we are not in control of whether or not Resonate or Nature's Remedy even open ever. We're not in control of what the state does. So it seems to me that at this critical juncture, to really rely on something where we're not in control of it, a shovel hasn't even been put in the dirt yet to, renovate the place down off of 30. And,
The renovations have been happening.
okay, but they don't have the provisional license yet. The data suggests from all the other places that have opened so far, you gotta wait a while to get your provisional license. And sometimes it means you have to actually complete the facility before you'll get it. And then after the provisional license comes in, you'll get a final license, but there's a couple month gap there. After you get the final license, you gotta wait a couple months before they even let you open the door. And right now, Resonate's still talking to planning board about all the things that they have to do. They have to talk to the fire chief, they gotta talk to the police chief. So to count on that money as $300,000 of a budget where we're really paper thin. This isn't like last year, the year before that. We really need every dime and we need to be able to count on it, isn't making everybody in the room comfortable, and for good reason, I think. Now, if the position of the town administrator is, even if we don't get that money, we'll find someplace else to get it, I would feel much more comfortable with that at this point. And we've already talked about, or at least I've already mentioned, perhaps doing something else with that money entirely, putting into the new capital stabilization fund. So if it's gonna make everybody in the room more comfortable, I don't see why this is gonna be a sticking point for us.
So we should just reduce the budget by $300,000 now. If you're gonna do it later, do it now.
Yeah,
Yep.
you just have a plan if you get that revenue in for what you would fund. It's sort of basic budgeting, I think, that you don't have confidence you're gonna get revenue.
But
You
we
think you
do
might get
have
it.
confidence we're gonna get the revenue. You keep saying that, but that's not the case.
Well, I don't have the confidence. I just want to state that for the record. I've been a big outspoken member of this board about utilizing those funds. And more importantly, something to also keep in mind is that $300,000, also a majority of that goes away after 5 years when the host agreement matures after 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So there are some other components to it, and it's and I have to agree, it is similar to the same method that we looked at a few years ago when we saw the UPS facility coming in. I think I've encouraged this on several meetings, that it would be best to utilize those monies for one-time expenses and not be included in the expense columns that we have to rely upon year after year. We can't count on 300 or 330,000 or 60,000, whatever that amount's going to be, every single year. So on top of your concerns, I've echoed the same concerns on our board. I don't align with one of my board members on that. I don't have confidence that those numbers are going to come in. I've just been paying attention to the press like everyone else. I don't see it happening. So I would be in favor of moving that money off to something within capital, that if we do get it, great. Go knock some things off our capital list that's growing and growing every single year, but not really rely upon it to pay for salaries or other expenses.
Donna?
Madam Chair, I think we discussed this the other night, and we said this is $300,000 in a $60+ million budget, and that as in the past years, we've been able to manage within that budget every single year. So I had confidence that we would be able to do the same thing this year, and I think it's silly for us when we're talking about an override for $3.2 million that we're focusing on $300,000.
Madam Chair, it's actually a big concern for us. But, and this will be my final comment on this, and hopefully we can move on. But, one of the, I guess, other elements to the marijuana money is it is a new source of revenue. So potentially, to be able to reduce the capital portion of the override, and this is why this is relevant, could we consider putting that into the capital stabilization fund to reduce the amount that we're requesting for an override? Is another thought that we had.
If I could just 2 points of clarification. The tax for marijuana sales for retail stays with the community forever, that 3%. There is some legislation proposed now about CCC over host agreements. Those host agreements that we have, the 3, we think stay intact. But the first one, Resonate, I looked at it today, it was 75,000 was the minimum threshold in which they would pay, all the way up to 250 based on sales. So if they had $6 million in sales, that's $900,000 to us. No, I'm sorry, $90,000 to us. So it's not a zero-sum game for us. We know that something will happen. I will tell you that from the last meeting to this, we had an upgrade of new growth by 100,000. Don't think we just set the budget and walk away and hope it all materializes. We work every day. We manage the organization to get every dollar from every permit and save every dollar that it's appropriated by town meeting when we go to procure something, if we can do it cheaper. So we can save things as we operate and manage. But some of the money certainly goes away in 5 years, and it's worthwhile discussion relative to putting that money just in capital for those 5 years, for that piece of that host agreement. But the tax money is supposed to stay forever based on sales.
Madam Chair, and just for the record too, I think I'm the only select board member that hasn't spoken up on this yet. So I have confidence too that the staff can manage the $300,000, and I wouldn't recommend it being taken out of the budget at this time. I think, like Donna said, a $60 million budget, everything is a moving target every day, and I have confidence that reductions would be made, things would be changed in order to keep a balanced budget.
So on multiple occasions, the town administrator has said that leaving it in is risky, that he doesn't even have full confidence in it. So I don't understand why we couldn't just take it out and make those necessary adjustments now rather than wait.
I think it was stated at our meeting on Tuesday that there would be line items within the municipal budget that our town administrator would look toward to make up any shortcomings. That was news to me on Tuesday. That would be the only.
Well, that makes it sound like there's fat in the municipal budget of $300,000, and if I was gonna be asking for a $3.2 million override, I wouldn't be saying to the residents right now, well, we can make up $300,000 in a $60 million budget. Because now that makes it sound like there's fat in the budget, so do we really need 3.2? Because on that logic, we need 2.9. I totally disagree with that logic that I can find it through the year by making consolidations.
The
Every-
idea that it's,
Wait,
the idea that
Doreen was
300,000.
saying something.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. We spoke about on the meeting on Tuesday, I had asked the town administrator about what we would do, what we would reduce to make up the $300,000, and the talk was increasing our trash bags by 50%. So if we're making hard decisions like that, if that's the recommendation of the cut, I would rather just, see, I have confidence that we can find the revenue. Because, that decision is a tough one to make, and I don't think we should make it until
to
we
Mark's
have to.
point, I mean, we have a call fire department. We talk
Right.
a lot about public safety. We budget a couple $100,000 for guys to make calls. Those calls go down. That's where your turn back comes from. So whether it's 50,000 or 40,000, those numbers can be substantial. Sometimes we use it for snow and ice. Sometimes we just manage it and we don't have a lot of calls. So in terms of $300,000 worth of fat, I'm not nervous because I have 98% of the money that comes from taxation, and we collect about 98% of what we put out. Excise tax is another one. People aren't, the values of automobiles drop off, and we miss that target. So there's a lot of pieces. You're focusing on one piece of a local revenue. There's 12 million in local aid that, if they were to be cut, they were cut in 2009, $600,000.
Remember?
We made it. We made it. I mean, it takes a lot of burden and pressure off of us, but again, it's about the elasticity of what the people are willing to pay for too. So that's really the balance that, I think we worked through with the chairman of the three committees, but you all can figure if it should be higher in terms of the ask.
Well, we will, and I mean, with due respect to the chairman of the three committees, this is why we're having this meeting. Have we considered the idea of a hiring and salary freeze to make up that $300,000?
No.
Should we?
No, I don't think you should, because I think you're gonna lose people that are critical to the operation.
Well, if the override doesn't get passed, we're gonna lose people who are critical to the operation too. So, I sort of wish that everybody were on the same page and had some skin in this game. I mean, we're talking about increasing salaries, we're talking about increasing positions in the municipal center, and at the same time talking about cutting, up to 4 members of the school side of the budget. Without, I don't know.
I think that needs clarification from the superintendent about those 4 people. I think that's an important piece that he needs to address.
Yeah, I'm sure he
And
will.
our
I've already
positions are
talked to him.
being restored.
Okay.
The only places we're adding is in the fire department. We're restoring positions that we've cut.
Well, we're also adding salary though,
Of course,
on our side. Okay.
yeah, we're adding salary in the school department too.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, can we hear from the
That's-
superintendent on that?
Sure.
Don't mind the payment.
Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure I know the exact question, but in speaking about the reductions, we would have 4 reductions of actual positions: an assistant principal, 3 teachers, 1 at the elementary level and 2 at the secondary level. We would be adding 3 positions, so we'd have a net loss of 1. The additional positions being in 1 and only adjustment counselor at the pre-K through grade 6 level, and 2 special education teachers.
Can I just
Yeah.
add real quickly to that? So so if we got an override though, then we would be able, well, it depends on the timing, but we would keep those positions. So those are real
That's right.
people that losing their job.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we make tough decisions already to make sure that we're getting what we think is gonna really meet the children's needs, which is that we haven't had an adjustment counselor position for our elementary kids. So that's one example. But if we had an override and we were fully funded, we wouldn't be letting those positions go.
That's correct.
I think
Right.
that's just.
Right. So it feels like the schools are making they've clarified their priorities,
Right.
you're letting some people go so that you can recognize those priorities and bring those additional positions on, but you have a net loss of a position.
Correct.
Although one of those positions is you are losing because of the need in the schools. That position would be lost regardless of whether or not
Which
your
position
budget.
is that?
Your the second grade teacher.
Yeah, it's not really second
It's
grade.
changed since,
Oh,
Yeah.
because they have movement inside of every grade.
oh, okay.
That's gonna change
Yeah.
whether it's a one-off. or
Oh, okay.
movement.
Back in the early fall, that would have been accurate, but it's just not accurate anymore.
If you didn't add those 2 special ed teachers back into your budget, would that cause your sped budget to increase by more than the $54,000 or the $114,000 you're carrying in those salaries?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll give you a quick example, but the position that we're adding at the high school, as you know, over the past few years, we've been developing programs throughout the district, but we usually start at the elementary level to retain kids in district. Obviously, those kids, they do age and they move up through our system. And right now we've got our largest group in 8th grade. We built programming. We now have those kids in 8th grade. Those kids are obviously going to 9th grade. So we need to develop that same programming and mirror it at the high school.
And then that's the 6th and 7th graders moving up into that
Correct.
8th grade level.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
so you're spending the $114,000 in salaries. You're taking 2 elementary school teachers away.
Right.
And you're putting them into sped to save an increase that probably would have been greater than $114,000 if you didn't do that.
That's correct.
Okay. So it makes sense to add those positions while reducing the other 2 then,
It would be fiscally crazy and bad for kids not to
do that.
not to have that program at the high school.
That makes sense.
But you would do that regardless of the appropriation, is that correct?
Yeah, like we
That's
are,
in the
we are
non-override
cutting
budget.
existing positions to make that happen. Correct.
You're doing that in the non-override budget.
Yeah, oh yeah. No matter what, even if we don't, if the override fails and we have to cut 4 teachers, we have to build that program.
So any budget that goes to town meeting should assume that we're not gonna get an override. Because you can't assume that the voters are gonna increase your taxes.
We're built to have that 4.13, and that high school position is in there.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I ask
Sure.
a follow-up on the cannabis thing? To generate $300,000 in taxes and fees, what kind of revenue do we need?
No, he's asking me, say it again, I'm sorry.
We're looking at $300,000 in that in fiscal year 21 in taxes and fees.
There's 3 host
$300,000.
agreements, I would have to pull them because they have a minimum floor of a payment and a maximum. And then we have estimated sales based on the 2 that open close to us in Leicester and Millbury in terms of the sales volume.
All right.
So that's what we base the number on. I did the math, I just don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Okay. My follow-up would be, is there anybody here who might have some experience in trying to open a cannabis shop that could say, sure, we can make that amount of money in 2 days, or it'll take us 2 years to
Madam
achieve
Chair.
that?
I'm gonna move the question. We've made our argument, and I think
fucking time.
it sounds like we're gonna agree to disagree on this one.
Okay, and I do just wanna say that our town staff is in constant communication with all businesses that are considering opening in Grafton, and
We facilitated like the water line at Route 30 for Resonate. They pulled the demo permit. There's work ongoing. Yes, they have to go to planning. We do think that approval is coming sooner rather than later. I won't put words into the planning board's mouth, but the new planner, Chris, feels that the request that they've made for traffic impact analysis is reasonable and can be done by Resonate for the next meeting. Still have CCC to go through, not disillusioned by that stumbling block.
did you have a next question?
So, I guess the next thing was around, just before we start talking about the need for an override, it's, the discussion about can we use, capital, because that is a new source of revenue, to put towards capital, and reduce the need for an override for that amount, for what our expectations are with the cannabis, in future years.
So take all the cannabis money, put it towards the capital stabilization account?
Yeah.
Okay.
Both tax and pilot?
Tax.
Tax and pilot. So the total combined,
Tax is permanent,
yep.
right, so it would be that.
You have any, thoughts on
And
that?
it throws off our projections for every other year out, because we were gonna use that for operations.
Sure, it's just, what I'm thinking was, we have to do everything we can to reduce the ask, as far as an override goes, that's something that we could do.
But we can do that anyway, though, too. We don't have to ask if if everybody feels like $1 million on capital is too much, we can reduce that ask. We can say 750.
Yeah, I mean, not to interrupt, but the beauty of the municipal staff capital stabilization account is just like the roads account. And you all know this, but other people might not. So we put together a list. It was a $16 million backlog of roads. We thought we could get through a season with a solid $1.5 million. So we did the override of the stabilization account for roads based on that kind of time period of what we could spend. So this million, the same way that they raised the 1.5, has to be appropriated by town meeting in order to spend it, but it only can be raised by the select board. So if we thought that there was any adjustment to be made, whether it's overly cumbersome or we just don't need it, we don't have to raise it and therefore not impact the taxpayer. So there's a lot of flexibility built into that proposal for that $1 million, just like the $1.5 million. So you really put the select board in control after it's appropriated to raise it for both the $1.5 million and this million. So that $2.5 million really to raise it and impact the tax bill rests with the select board.
I think one of the things though is every time we talk about these stabilization accounts, or whether it's an account, say for OPEB or something like that, the conversation always revolves around, what if we had a dedicated revenue stream? If only we had a dedicated revenue stream, we would put a little bit more money away for OPEB, we could put a little bit more money away for capital. And while this $1 million would help for capital stabilization at the same time, if, you always look back on moments where you could have saved money. God, I wish I had saved that money back then, I'd be so much better off now, but we spent it on something we needed at the time. If we exhibited, I think, the discipline to take a new revenue source and put it towards something that everybody kicks the can down the road on, like capital, I think in 5 or 10 years, we would be very glad that we did that. Because as we always say, capital's not going away, and that list just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. We're not gonna have fewer capital assets in the future, we'll probably have more. So, we could eventually someday decide, what, we've done enough on capital, but I can't even imagine when that day would be. So, at this point, we have a unique opportunity here. There is a crisis here. Yes, there's an emergency here. We have a unique opportunity to decide how we're going to be disciplined going forward in doing this. And I think taking a dedicated revenue stream and putting it towards something like capital, which for generations, leaders before us have sort of ignored to our detriment, I think that would behoove us. And I think Finance Committee's point is well taken on that. Because if we're sitting here talking about an override for operating, we could do that. Set up the capital stabilization account, take into account the fact that we're putting $300,000 for marijuana money, potentially per year into that, and then just work with that moving forward. Every dime we put towards capital today is going to save taxpayers money down the road. So when this particular override goes to expire, we can look back and say, yes, we're glad we did that because we saved you money. You know what I mean?
And we don't have a very good foundation, for that $300,000. Like, it's based on a huge number of multi-million dollars of sales, but we don't have a good, like, empirical number. It's just $300,000. We think that it's, you know, it's really a guesstimate. So if we're funding operations, which includes a lot of salaries and positions and whatnot, just doesn't seem like the best fit. And from a planning standpoint, it is a new source of revenue, and just it's one of those foundational pieces that if you can put it in, you know, it doesn't come along that often. You can have a really important piece of your foundation taken care of.
Just, Leicester was the first one to open for marijuana. So having conversations with the three licensees, if you will, or the host community agreement holders, in terms of their sales, that number at 300,000 across three is low. We were conservative with that number, just because we didn't know the timing of things. But the sales, even based on Leicester's numbers and what they get in tax revenue, they're exceeding their estimates and exceeding the numbers that we're even carrying. So it's not, we weren't completely guessing. We looked at the
Sure,
market
it's just that
and what
we
those
have
yields
so many
were.
opening up, we just don't know what's gonna happen with the market. So my point is that it's not very reliable in terms of, we're predicting that we're gonna get 300, even if that's conservative, but 2, 3, 4 years from now, we have just no idea what's gonna happen with that. So that's my point. And so we have a huge backlog of capital, be a good revenue source for that. So,
Well, I think there's a piece of this with the capital I think is important that Dan has to speak to, because there are a number of school projects that make that number 15 or 18 million dollars. And we did an investment grade audit here 10 years ago. We changed a lot of buildings, schools, and town from oil to natural gas, huge efficiency, a lot of savings, obviously better for the environment. You know, we used the savings to pay the debt service. We didn't do an override for that $6.5 million project. We used the savings, about 320, to pay the debt service, which is inside the operating levy. Dan is looking at now an IGA, an investment grade audit, through a third party that would guarantee the savings if they were to upgrade their systems that are inside the capital list now. They have to go through that investment grade audit piece. Dan should talk about that, because that will reduce that capital burden on the town. But I just want to make one quick thing clear, because we talked about 3.2, like it's going to happen tomorrow and we're going to appropriate it. It's parceled out just like it was in 2014. So, you know, in the first year, if it were to pass, the total is like 547. School would need 209. If we do the police, fire, and restore 3 positions, it's 333. It's a big number, because we don't really know what a fire chief cost us. In year 2, school is 475, municipal is at 100. And again, we continue with the planned replacement for cruisers and the fire department. Those are the only 2 things we look at in 2022. 2023, another fire addition based on the work that the study came back with, and the study group was with us. And cruiser replacement continues. School gets 470, we get 100 in 2023. And then 2024, I can't read that number, that's why I brought glasses. Municipal, there's 2024 for the using of that 3.2 million, there's $0, and 592, 299 goes to the school. So it's not, no one's going to be impacted immediately, as it is stated in the memo, for the whole 3.2 million. We parcel it out over those 5 years, just like we did from 14 to 21.
Question. On the sheet, we're looking at cruiser replacement for FY '24 and FY '25. How are you doing that without any municipal ops using this override money?
Becky, you know that one? On this sheet, I don't have it on. I have municipal operation 333, 100, 124, I don't have it.
It's in the override, 98,000 each year.
Okay.
Well, are you just gonna carry it to this top line for me? That's all
It's
right.
in the spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's on this one, but it's just not in the top one where it breaks out the school and town.
So we're planning on paying for the police cruiser out of operating.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, consistent with what I think the finance committee wanted many moons ago.
Sure.
yeah, we replace those every 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we moving on to get back to their presentations now?
Well, could I ask a question? It seems to me that we need an override, right? So I'd like to ask the select board if they're in a position to call for an override for fiscal year 21. Is that,
I think we made that clear.
okay?
Yeah.
So then the next question should be, we could go through the presentation, but I think all the numbers are here, and I think we all understand them. I know I do, as a member of the Finance Committee. So now the question is October versus May. And I know a recommendation here says that we want to do it in October, but I have a couple of questions, if I can. May I ask them?
Do you
Is this
think
the time
maybe
to-
they'll be answered in the presentation?
I mean, I read the memo. Are you gonna add anything in the presentation that's not in the memo?
I'm actually done talking, I'm answering questions now. If Jay has some particulars, which I think he does, and then Becca has the presentation, might have answers to your questions during that, but I don't know until we do them.
I'll do whatever you
I
tell me
say
to
we
do.
do the presentations.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Jay, I think you're up. Jay is. Yes, ma'am. I think. Can't see you. I think you're up. I think you're up.
I am, okay.
Thank you.
I am up. What can I tell you?
You can't say the dog ate your homework.
No, I'm ready.
Tim said you had a presentation.
Oh, no. Did I do? I thought you were talking about
Becca
Becca's
has the
presentation.
You have notes from what you would use the money on if it was to pass.
Oh,
Right? And
yeah.
That's,
I thought we were talking about presentation, and Becca
Oh,
has
okay.
that, just to be clear. I do not have a presentation, but I'll answer any question you may have. So is the question, what would happen if it
Should we get
passed?
the presentation?
Yeah, let's do the
Okay.
presentation first then. I thought you had a separate one, sorry. All right, Becca, then you're up.
We are a well-oiled machine.
so the
Yeah.
question is, do you wanna go through on paper or you want it up on the screen?
I'm just gonna talk generally, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Everyone's read it, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's fine.
All right. I think it's worth going through just so that the public can hear it as well.
yeah, great. Even though we, yeah, even though we know it.
We know,
that
but let's
it's
base it on
being-
Talk
Buddy.
about process, not specific. Oh, but do you want me to plug in?
I think you should.
Yeah.
I think it's easier for
I might have it.
the people.
Absolutely.
And that way it gets, yeah, everybody can see it. People at home can hear it. Oh, hi. No, I still see it.
Oh, never mind, I'm up.
There's water. Where's the water? That's it.
Running low.
I thought there'd be a picture.
Should have brought a bigger one.
Okay. So just, I know everyone at this table knows, a couple weeks ago, the select board charged the town administration and the school superintendent's office with coming up with a recommendation for an override. So, we sat down several times. Jay and Dan came to us with a new set of numbers from what we had previously talked about in January. So, you know, the 6.5 that we started with has come down. A lot of that is because of the school department. And you'll notice the recommendation is significantly lower than that. That's because we've taken out pieces from the school and taken out pieces from the town. So after the request was made of the select board, to provide scenarios, I sort of, tried to boil it down because there are a million scenarios we could present with a million different options, but I tried to present the gold standard, which was everything, and what would that cost and what's included, and then the middle of the road, which is sort of where we ended up in the recommendation, something that was palatable and recognizable to people because it looked a lot like 2014. It would get the schools where they needed to be in 5 years, and it would get the town to maintain level service and also provide critical public safety features. And then the third scenario is sort of a bottom of the barrel, you know, get the schools what they need and just do public safety. And that's sort of where I landed. So everyone's seen the three scenarios. I can go through each one if we want to. We all know what they cost. If we want to have questions about them,
Becca, if you wouldn't mind, for the people, for the benefit of the people at
just
home
roll
who
through them?
haven't yet, if
Okay,
you wouldn't mind.
all right. So just a brief history, I know everyone, or the majority of the people sitting here know this, but we Grafton did pass its first override in 2014. $3.5 million override, 1.5 of that was dedicated to a road stabilization account to address a backlog of roads projects that we had. And then the remainder of that was to go towards the school. And the plan was to get the schools at 525 for 5 years. We know that one of those years we couldn't make it happen because in the projections we had, we didn't foresee state aid being level or lower, and we didn't foresee health insurance increasing as much as it did in the last 5 years. so things change. We've managed to get through 6 budget cycles with what was presented as a 5-year override, so, we initially thought, looking at this, that in FY '20, we were gonna be short. There's a lot of reasons we weren't. Good management, the fact that new growth has been phenomenal in the last 3 years, for Grafton, caveat there. And, again, Jay and Dan and Tim have managed the organization in a way that has allowed for the override to essentially stretch a year further than we initially anticipated. So, looking forward, just some things to think about, in, why we need an override. Proposition 2.5, of course, passed in 1988, does only allow Massachusetts municipalities to increase their tax levy 2.5% each year. The only way around that is new growth, which you get each year. It's based on new construction in town. And then you also have the ability to do an override, and that's where we are today. That new money that we get each year, it doesn't total a lot. Typically, it's under $2 million. It's been as low as $1.2 million. It depends a lot on new growth. And we have a lot of needs in town. The school department has grown a lot in the last 5 years, and that was the plan with the override. We wanted to increase services and provide students with the best education we can, and we've done that, and we want to continue doing that. On the town side, we have seen huge increases in fixed cost, health insurance being the biggest one. It's not something we have a ton of control over. We manage it the best we can. We shop the market. We try to keep claims low. We try to do training, whatever we can do, but that's something that we really don't have a lot of control over. And it does impact our budget year to year. And then, obviously, new growth is a big thing. Tim talks a lot about it. Economic development, we have 7 priority development sites. If they all come to fruition, we don't ever have to have this conversation, because we're gonna get immense new growth, and it's gonna carry us through for a long time. But that hasn't happened yet, so here we are. So, the proposals. Recommending the October 2020 ballot. A lot of that has to do with just the fact that we feel like we're gonna know a lot more information in October about revenue than we do today. And we think there's a lot of value to having time to educate the public and talk to them about what an override means, how it's gonna impact them, and why we need it. Each of these proposals does have a capital stabilization account component of $1 million. The select board will reserve the right to raise that million every fiscal year, just like they do the roads account. So each year that the select board, if passed, will have authority over $2.5 million to raise for capital and for roads. So what that does is it gives the select board a lot of opportunity to mitigate any major cost increases for residents by not raising that money in 1 year. All right, so all funding requests. So this includes the school department's new numbers, so not the 5.9%, but the new numbers that were agreed upon in the school committee. I don't know the percent off the top of my head. 4.7% in 21. And then it also includes funding the positions on the town side that were initially presented in January, when we came up with the 6.5 number. So there were 15 positions, new or restored for the town. It included all of the public safety positions and then a number of other positions from engineering, a grant person, continuing to fund the police cruisers, increasing the snow and ice budget. That is a total of $4.3 million, including the $1 million for capital. This is not the recommended scenario, obviously, but if the board were to choose, this is certainly an option. So This is the same request, but it does change, the year that the marijuana revenue comes in. So it's the same overall request, but it does change the way in which the money is raised in each fiscal year. So again, 3.3 for operations, 1 million for. So this is the recommended scenario. This is the 2.2 million for operations, and the 1 million for capital, which is a total of 3.2 million over 5 years. So this does include funding the schools at their new requested 5-year plan, the 4.7, 4.33, 3.8, 3.81, and 3.84. And then it does also include reinstating, 3 positions on the municipal side that have been cut in the last few years. And then obviously funding the public safety recommendations out of the fire study, which were the chief, a lieutenant, and a captain over the next 3 years. On the expense side for the town, this scenario does include reinstating the police cruiser replacement program as a part of the operational budget each year, which in FY21, currently in our budget proposal, the police cruisers are not included. So same situation, this is if we were to get the marijuana revenue in 22, it does change the amount raised in the first year. Nothing changes in terms of what's funded. But it does impact the tax bill in the first year more because you do have to raise more money in year 1 to make up for the marijuana revenue. And again, part of the reason for the October recommendation is that by October, we're gonna have a much better sense of where those marijuana companies are in town, if they're already up and running, do they not have their license yet, are they still 6 months out? We're gonna know a lot more of that between now and October. And I think that was part of the reasoning for waiting, to sort of see, are we gonna have to raise more in year 1 to make up the shortfall for not having marijuana money, or are we gonna be okay, are we gonna meet the mark, and we don't need to raise that 300 in year 1? So this is the, sort of the lower level, lower level scenario. This scenario is a $2 million operational override. It only includes school and fire positions, and it does still include the 1 million for capital. So this only covers the requests that the school department has made for 5 years, and then the fire chief, fire captain, and fire lieutenant. And same scenario in B, again, if you don't get the marijuana money, then you do have to raise more in the first year, but nothing changes in terms of the number being, the things being funded. This is just a little bit about the capital stabilization account. I do think that this piece needs to be flushed out a little more, and this is something we talked about yesterday when we met with the chairs. Dan and I have been talking a little bit about creating sort of a preliminary plan. We do have a 5-year capital plan. It is just a long list of things that need to be replaced over the next 5 years. It does exceed $2 million in each of those years. So we sort of talked about, well, we need to sort of sit down and figure out, if we had 2 million, what would we do? With the caveat that that could change in any given year, because you never know what's gonna happen. Just because the plan says we need a fire engine in 24, if the fire engine's running fine in 24 and we don't see a need to replace it, we're probably not gonna replace it in 24. So, part of the reason for us sort of hesitating on this piece, like Tim mentioned, is the investment grade audit. We do wanna wait for the schools to do that and have that firm come back and say, hey, this is what you can replace, this is what it's gonna save you, and this is what it's gonna cost you. And that will be a huge component of that 5-year plan, because it's gonna move a lot of the school requests around based on that investment grade audit. So I would say on this piece, there's definitely more to come.
So Becca, that's something that CIPC certainly could take on as well, or definitely assist with.
Yeah, yeah. definitely a group effort, I think. But I do think that the school piece is huge in that, because there's no sense in sitting down and looking at the plan now, and then they do the investment grade audit, and they say, well, you can actually do, these 7 projects, and, lease them essentially, and have a savings, and then it changes the whole thing. Because then you just take a piece off the top for a lease, instead of having these, 7 items in these 5 different years.
Becca, what's the interplay between having a capital stabilization account and use of free cash? Because presumably, we're pulling about $1 million a year out of free cash every year to deal with capital. Now we're gonna have $1 million in capital stabilization. What's the plan there? Would you go, if for a capital need, for instance, would you go to free cash first and then to stabilization next? How does that work?
You can do both at the same
Yeah.
time.
I
Depending on
think,
the need and the input from you guys and from CIPC, it might be a $2 million plan one year, it might be $1.7 million the next year.
Okay.
Got it. And the plan would be similar to the road stabilization account. I guess that'd be a discussion for the select board. Do we raise that amount by 2.5 each year, or do we just keep it at the $1 million?
Yeah, I think it would.
Right, historically,
Right.
we've done on the road stabilization, we've stuck with the 1.5 million for the roads.
Right.
Presumably, you could do the same, or you could raise that,
Right.
to recognize the increased cost every year.
the way it's presented here, just to be clear, I did not take the 2.5%, so that will impact tax bills slightly.
Yep.
Not a huge amount, but just something to note.
Sure.
If I may, Rebecca?
Yeah.
The safer grant line item in all of the scenarios is blank.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's a good point, actually. Thank you.
I get it.
So, like Tim said, we got a memo from Mary Oliver, the town assessor, about a week ago saying, hey, I think we can increase our current projection for new growth for FY21. So previously we were carrying 550 based on everything that's happened so far in the town. She's already met that number, and we haven't even gotten into the spring building season. So she's pretty confident that she's gonna meet the 650 number and possibly even exceed that. So through that increase, we've actually taken out the assumption that we're gonna get the SAFER grant in 21, which is, it's sort of a wash. But the point about that is that by October, again, we'll know whether or not we have the SAFER grant.
Okay.
So we potentially, there's like $100,000 or so in there that we may either not have to raise if the override passes, or $100,000 that could go towards shoring up the school shortfall in 21 if the override were to not pass.
And Becca, the investment grade audit, the timeline, or maybe Dan,
I don't know.
I just want to know the timeline for that. That's guaranteed to be done before October? Is that in play now?
Yeah, we're about to go out to bid, and we expect to be choosing a vendor late April, something like that, and then expect them to do the assessment in May.
Okay.
So probably have a plan back to let you guys know about late May or June. And then, so in terms of the amount, there's up to like 3 to 5 million worth of projects that could potentially be put into that. So, if we have a $16 million backlog, the backlog could go down to 13 million or something like that. I think we would potentially, still have big projects like parking lots, roofs, possibly the turf fields or ladder trucks that could still be used, that the $1 million override capital funds. But yeah, that's the timeline on that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, someday we won't be able to text, but I am getting texts from people who are at home. If you could lean into your microphones a little bit, they cannot hear you, so I wanted to tell you that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask questions now?
Sure. Well,
Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
The timing, I want to understand a couple of things. In the memo, on the override process, you said, due to the election in May, we are recommending that the board wait until June 2020 to set the ballot. So in June 2020, are we going to set the ballot for $2.2 million or $3.2 million? Is that what that means?
That's what the recommendation is
Okay.
saying, yes.
So then how does waiting until October to know what the marijuana money is and the SAFER grant money is going to change a number that you're going to set in June at 3.2 million? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I'll answer it.
Okay.
It'll always be 3.2 million. You'll just appropriate at town meeting in October, more or less depending on how much you get from those two revenue sources. Say if a grant comes in, I don't ask to raise and appropriate that $100,000.
So I guess my question is you don't set the tax rate until November. So if you do an override in May, when people are used to budget and people are used to overrides being in May, the number's not going to change. What changes is the amount you set the tax rate in November. So it doesn't matter if you do an override in May or if you do an override in October. The new revenues and all that will have no bearing on it whatsoever. So
Well, it
ordinarily.
would, though, if you got the money, it would.
Okay, well, ordinarily, what you would do, in the way my experience has been, is you go to town meeting in May with two budgets.
We've
First
done that,
budget
yeah.
is the non-override budget, the balanced budget. The second budget is the contingent budget on the override. If the override passes, then the contingent budget goes into effect July 1st. And when you set the tax rate in October, you'll have your final new growth numbers, you'll know what your marijuana revenue is, and so maybe you don't raise as much, or maybe you raise more. So waiting in October, having that argument that we'll know more doesn't really affect the setting of the tax rate.
Correct.
The other
That's what we
problem.
did in 2014, right?
Okay, so the town is used to that. The other problem that I have with the October date is you write here that says, by waiting until October, the school district anticipates making 4 personnel reductions along with a decrease in non-personnel costs. If the override is passed, the school district will have the opportunity to reinstate 2 positions in FY '21 and 2 more in FY '22. So we're gonna lay people off in June, and then October, we're gonna reinstate them when the school year starts in September. So I'd be very interested to hear from the superintendent how you're gonna reinstate positions, and I assume they're teacher positions. I know my son just picked all his classes for the fall, so I imagine you already know what's gonna happen. So now all of a sudden, what are you gonna do, rearrange all the kids in the fall and bring teachers back?
No, that's why we can't, if we could do that easily, which you can't, we would bring all 4 positions back. So obviously, the assistant principal position, we can bring that back in early November, no problem. One of the other 2 positions is, more of a support position, if you will, without getting into too many specifics where they don't have a class. We're not gonna have a grade 3 teacher, the kids just get to know the teacher in November and okay, now we're switching it up. We're not doing that.
Why would we lay people off in June if we're gonna bring them back in October? I don't understand. I'm very confused with the October date. It seems to me that the residents of this town are used to voting the operating budget in May, and if there's gonna be an override, it should be before the fiscal year begins. So I would recommend to the select board that you consider, if you're going to do an override, that you do it in May and not October, because I don't think October gains you anything. You don't set the tax rate till November. The assistant town administrator and the town administrator said we would raise what we need to raise when we set the tax rate. So when you vote that, you're not changing the $2.2 million number. Forget about capital for a second. You're not changing the $2.2 million number, regardless of what that marijuana revenue or safer grant is. It's going to be 2.2. You're gonna increase the levy by 2.2. How much of that 2.2 you raise in the fall will depend on what you take back in revenue for marijuana and everything else. So I would urge the select board to call for the override in May.
So actually, I have a couple questions for the superintendent, if that's okay, on his numbers. Mark, I agree with you on the October date, and I think we can speak to that in a moment. But Jay, while I have you up here, back in January, we all were upstairs and we were given a presentation that included a much larger override request. And as the town side just spoke to, as Becca said, a lot of the reductions that brought that number down from 6.5 to a proposal of 3.2 did come from the school side.
Right.
When I was looking at page 13 of our presentation from January 14th, which residents can still find online if you're home, the school request for FY21 was $877,000, almost $878. FY22 was $714, FY23 $628, FY24 $788, FY25 $737. These are the increases, all helping to accumulate a deficit, operating deficit of about $5.5 million when combined with the town side over 5 years. What changed for you guys? And you and I think I know the answer to this question. I had a brief conversation earlier today, but for the benefit of people at home, what changed?
So obviously we met in January. What we presented on this, in terms of the school component, was definitely a very level service budget. I want to stress that that is simply maintaining what we do now for the future, be it 5 years, 6 years, what have you. A big part of that is projections in terms of staffing. Most of the things, transportation, salaries, we kind of have our best estimate. When Dan and I, after that meeting, obviously the number, the general tenor seemed to be that number was quite high. We took the initiative, sat down and went through the budget for about 2 days and just poured through it. What we focused in on were our projections around special education staffing. We've had a tremendous amount of growth over the last 2 decades here in Grafton, in total, but certainly in the area of special education. We had simply built into our projections, well-meaning, but we had built in what the same level of increases that we've had over the past 5 to 10 years. When we looked at that, and let me just back up for 1 second. As you probably know, we've been putting for years a tremendous amount of work into slowing down the rate at which we're expanding our staffing in special education while still providing great services to kids. That's just a necessary thing. We finally have some traction with that, and it feels like we've kind of turned the Titanic around a little bit. Dan and I, in looking at that, feel comfortable that that trend is going to be able to continue. It's nothing but a projection, I will tell you that. So we therefore pulled out a number of the paraprofessional and special education teacher positions that we had built into the projections. So the decrease you see is 100% because of staffing around the area of special education. While I'm filibustering, I want to stress that the piece about that the level of service component, unlike in 2014 where we spent seemed like a lot of time talking about good to great, and you may recall that we figured out what level service was, and then a percentage was added on top of that for growth, at maybe 0.75%. That's why we got to that 5.25. It wasn't that we needed 5.25 necessarily just to get by for 5 years. It might have been 4.5% in that area. There was an extra piece put in there for improvement, growth, or to use when things went south, as they often do. But that was the intention. So I want to be clear that in some ways, what we've put before you, in keeping with what we talked about in January, is level service in just that.
But without that additional
Correct.
piece
Correct.
that we built into the budget, or built into the override back in 2014.
Correct.
Okay. So when I look at this, and I have to be honest with you, I've been sitting around for some of these meetings over the past couple of years, and I've been sitting around for discussions about the teacher's contract in 2017. I'm very familiar with your numbers. I was a little concerned for you. I got a little bit claustrophobic when I read the percentage increases. A little bit like the feeling I get when I drive through a parking garage. I feel like it's just a little too tiny. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, how are we going to fit through this? I very much appreciate the work that you did in putting together these numbers. I appreciate the work the school committee did in putting together these numbers. This is a tremendous effort to show the community that you're trying to be more efficient and deliver the same quality product at a cost that's a little bit less. I'm just concerned that there isn't enough wiggle room in here for you. Our experience over the past 5 years has been that we didn't actually give you the 5.25 every single year. We were able to stretch the override from 5 years to 6 because 1 year we shorted you. We went down to like 4.13% because of a healthcare issue. Another year it was down to 4.79. And then 1 year we were going to do it again, but we got lucky because we found some healthcare savings by moving out of the GIC. So the experience over the past 5 years, 6 years, hasn't been one of going from good to great, but it's been one every year, still trying to piece this thing together when the inevitable comes up. And, again, I hate to keep using the word opportunity amidst a crisis here, but we do have the opportunity to sit here and look back at the last 5 years and say, okay, we're about to repeat the same thing. What would we have done differently in 2014 if we had if we knew then what we know now? But we can do that right now, and we can do it by saying, okay, budgeting a little too close to the mark is a little bit like over-promising and under-delivering. Our intentions are good. We intend to give a quality product to the residents for a lower price, but at the end of the day, if we say, oops, we've got, somebody with needs moved into the district, our costs are increasing, that means we have to let another staff member go. All the public sees is, oh geez, there they are again. not quite getting it right. So, my recommendation would be to actually bring you guys up to a higher percentage than what I'm seeing in these scenarios. What I'm seeing here, what is it? It's 4.447383838. I wrote it down.
Yeah, we level out about.
Yeah, 4.743383838 basically. We have been going off of an estimation of 5.25 for 5 years. I think we would be doing our job as being responsible stewards by saying 5 across the board, which is less than the 5.25 that we have been requesting from the public over the past 5 years. Much less, by the way, for those of you who've been around for a while, remember 8% increases before the 2014 override. You know, much larger increases, and still provide you guys with enough wiggle room in lean years where things come up to be able to manage those years. And God forbid, when there are efficiencies, be able to say, yeah, let's add some programming, or let's add some counseling, or let's make sure everybody's taken care of. That would, I would be more comfortable if the number were a little bit larger. And God forbid, again, if there are increased efficiencies when the state comes in and our reimbursements from the Education Opportunity Act start kicking in FY23, or God forbid, state funding increases under Chapter 70, then we take this override that's supposed to last for 5 years and stretch it to 7 or 10.
Right.
Like, that would be my ideal scenario. But that's just, I mean, that's my recommendation.
You're definitely preaching to the choir, and I'm never gonna
I have
argue
two
against
things.
that.
I have two things. First of all, I just can't let it go. You said we got lucky by moving to the GIC. That wasn't luck. It was managing the budget as we do every year.
But we didn't intend to find one-time savings there. We, okay, that's fine. Okay.
You work to find
That's
them.
fine.
You work to make the budget balance. So it's not luck. Money doesn't fall into our lap. It's worked hard by our town staff and the school department to manage the budget.
My comment wasn't intended to offend anybody.
And
Can I, one thing, because Jay, you're right, the special ed piece is a huge component, but with the help of the school committee, finance committee, board of selectmen, you created a $200,000 stabilization account for those instances when those things happen, when that kid moves in and has $25,000 or $30,000 worth of need that we don't have budgeted. You created that account, that
Yeah, that's true.
stabilization to those particular needs.
But as you know, often over the course of the past 5 years, even that $200,000, that's half of a year for some.
Yeah, and thank God we haven't had to use it. That's great.
Right, but
That's good. But we created it. I think we should commend ourselves for having that foresight.
yes, I'm all for commending ourselves for everything. But right now, I'm just suggesting that maybe this is a little too tight on the school side.
okay, but we do have to balance with the entire community as well. And there are people that this is really hard to hear that we're going to have to ask for more money for an override. They cannot afford it.
Okay, but
And we have to have a balance, so
Right.
that's what we're doing here, we're having the discussion to make sure that we can balance the needs of the community.
well, I mean, if you know
We're
better
also
than I
giving
do what the
ourselves-
balance is, then
we're
good for
also
you.
giving
but we're
ourselves
trying to figure it out.
cap space.
Right.
We don't have to raise that every year.
Right.
I mean, we
Yeah.
make decisions every single year on what our levy is gonna be, and if we don't need it, then we don't need it. But it would,
Right.
it does feel tight. It would be nice to have it if we need it.
If you look at the budget that the school department put out, that the school superintendent put out, based on the town administrator's estimates and his 5-year projection, and versus what the school superintendent put together, the difference is 3.1 million from what you had originally in your budget to now, you're at 2 million, is what you're saying the shortfall. So that's $1.1 million less based on what your original projections are. And so you're saying you're comfortable with the 1.1 less over 5 years? And to follow up what Matt just said, if we don't need it in a particular year, you don't raise it, you stretch the last override out 6 years.
Correct.
So maybe you can stretch this one out 7 years.
Right.
If you put more money into it now. You're not gonna raise it all
Right.
in the first year. So that $1.1 million reduction, it's kind of, I'm concerned about that. So what is
Oh, yeah.
what is the
I'm
impact?
concerned with or without it. I guess this is the fundamental challenge is this, at least from the school end, what I'm talking about isn't like hopes and dreams. It's not even in that ballpark. This is averting disaster in 22 on. We will be dysfunctional incredibly quickly, and getting it back would take us a decade plus. That's fundamentally, I think that's my core job, is to not let it completely fall apart.
And that's what the $2 million number is.
Yeah, that we are getting by, and we'll sleep at night, but not particularly well.
The 3.1 million will let you sleep better?
Well, that would, but let's be real clear.
'Cause I'm worried about the
if
sleeping.
we don't need those positions, like we prided ourselves on not despite public opinion sometimes, creating like fake positions or in terms of
We know
projections.
you don't do that.
So if we don't need those positions in 3 years out, we have 2 special education teachers and 2 paraprofessionals, and that Titanic has turned around and we're doing great. I want to just be upfront about that. Could we use that money incredibly well? Bring back math coaches, literacy coaches, curriculum, more teacher supports. We could do that so easily. I can't even tell you.
Well, you'd have to
but
convince
I want
town
to be
meeting
clear
about
about it. I don't know if I answered your question, Mark.
You did 100%, and I think I agree with you on the number.
Thank you.
Yep, Eric?
Yep.
Oh, just one after Eric and Ray.
Yeah, I do want to just agree with kind of the overall philosophy that I think Ed and Matt were saying, where I would feel more comfortable if there was some wiggle room on the top, because my concern on something like this, if we're going to do an override, it's going to be very difficult if this one passes to come back in any kind of short amount of time. So I'd just be worried, year 2, 3, we bump up against it. It's very difficult, in my opinion, to go back for small adjustments like that. So that's where I stand on that. And then I guess I'd like to hear from both Tim and Jay about what the difference would be for their budgeting if the override was passed in May versus October, because I'm kind of getting caught up to this now, but when we were here in January, we were talking about March, maybe April, May, and now it's October. So I just want to know if there's a material difference in each of your budgets. I'm assuming it would be easier if this was passed in May, but I would like to just hear high level how that works out.
Yeah, on the school end, it would be easier. Dan earlier mentioned that we had in what's before you a 4.7% increase, but again, that's that recommendation for October. So going back to what Mark had said, we've by October reduced 4 positions and you bring 2 back. That gets us to the 4.7. So if the timing was to be in May, have I lost it yet? If we did it in May, we would try to keep those 2 positions. So I don't know the exact number, but say it would be 4.9 as opposed to 4.7. That's the biggest difference fiscally on our end.
Yeah, and those are 2 people who are employed now.
Correct.
Yep. You know what they can do.
I know who they are. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then any difference for you, Tim?
Just really police cars and fire department, and restoring 3 positions, 1 custodial that's important to the library when they open.
Okay.
So that's the only thing we have. So if we don't get it, we're just simply, we're gonna do what we're doing today, not purchase and not.
What's the difference with the fire department? Do you get to hire them earlier, or what?
No, I mean, there's gonna be a process that I'm gonna have to go through in terms of an assessment center, a recruitment process. And it's a unique situation because I still have a volunteer dedicated chief that I want to keep because he has people that follow him into that building.
Yeah.
And I have to balance that with a very unique full-time person that's going to continue that relationship going forward.
But you said the override wouldn't have any bearing on that because you have more new growth now, so that you can go ahead and hire that chief regardless of the override.
But in terms of timing, I don't, to get to the brass tacks of it, I don't know if I'm going to hire that person in July or November.
But the new growth would cover that, not an override or a
Yes.
grant.
That's correct.
Laura had something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that, obviously the school committee would love more money, just in case that wasn't clear. I feel like we often get backed into a corner and we can't win. We come with what we need and we're told it's too high. We come with what we're asked to bring and we're told it's too low. But I just wanted to be very clear in case it wasn't when Jay was speaking that, of course, we would like more money to, grow our schools instead of having to fight to keep them level every 6 years or so, and to have a little wiggle room would be great. We also know how important it is that this gets passed, and I think I'm speaking for myself, that my 100% goal is, I haven't slept in 6 years, Mark, so my goal is,
You look good for someone who hasn't slept in.
thank you very much, is to get this passed and to do whatever it takes to get that passed. I've been very clear about that. So it's coming up with leadership, unity, and finding a number that we think this town is comfortable. And I trust our committee and our schools and our administration to do what we can do, because we've been continually, to use a J term, knocking it out of the park for this town. And we deserve to continue the opportunity to do that.
I had a comment from the audience.
Ray Mead, Brigham Hill Road. I've got three things to talk about. One, with the finance committee, you have the concern about the $300,000 for the marijuana money or whatever it is. One thing that you have to keep in mind, and you guys know this, and you know this too, is that there are multiple areas that are projected for the budget. One is new growth. Now, I don't know what the new growth is. I haven't looked at it. One is at $300,000 for the marijuana. Another one is tax collections. Another one is state funding. So it's all up in the air. That's municipal government. That's what happens. That's what happens every single year in every single municipal government across this Commonwealth. Tim and his staff, how long have you been here?
I don't remember anymore. 12 years.
Tim's been here, let's say 8 years. No, he's been here 12 years. But they've done a great job of bringing in a balanced budget every single year. Now, when we get to October, that may change a little bit. New growth may not be $2 million, maybe 1.8. State aid may drop by $135,000, or tax collections may drop from 98% to 94%. So I understand the $300,000. I would be concerned about it myself, but that's something that you take care of in October. Okay? 2, I agree with Laura, and I agree with some of the other people in the room. If you're going to do an override, do it. Don't wait, because by October, it's going to get worse. Trust me, it's going to get worse. If all of those projections that I just talked about don't come through, that 3.2 million is going to be 3.6 million. Number 3, the fire department. Everybody knew I was going to be here tonight. The fire department. I saw this tonight for the first time, that we're going to go for a grant. Not that I knew that. I knew that we were going to go for a grant. We're not going to put on a fire captain until fiscal year 22. We're not going to put on a fire lieutenant until fiscal year 23, which is not actually in the fire study committee's recommendations. I'm not sure where the fire lieutenant came from. By May of this year, or early June, this department in the Grafton Fire Department will be down to 1 chief from 4. From 4. There will be no more district chiefs. There'll be no north end chief, no chief in the center, no south end chief. Currently, there isn't a full-time inspector. We had a full-time inspector, but that hasn't materialized. Now, inspections are getting done, but they're getting done on a as needed and appointment basis. The department itself is not progressing because the current chief, who has been chief for 17 years, can't do it all. He can't work a full-time job and be a fire chief in a town of 20,000 people and do the job that he needs to do. The fire department needs a new full-time chief, a new captain for inspections and fire prevention, another captain for training, recruitment, and fire prevention. This is not something that can wait until fiscal year 23. I got off the fire department in 2003. I spent 32 years on the fire department. Currently, the fire department is probably about 55% of the amount of people that were on when I got off. We need a recruitment program. We need a retention program. We need a training program. We don't have that. And now, as more people get off the department, there are fewer and fewer people to even work on any of this stuff. So for $418,500, please write that down.
Way ahead of you.
You can fill all 3 positions, and the Grafton Fire Department can start moving towards the future. We are one of the only departments around that does not have a full-time chief. One of the only departments. You cannot run a fire department without full-time staff. Now, I say full-time staff, I say full-time command staff. Do we need full-time firefighters? No. Because the job of these three people is to create programs to bring more people in, to go into the schools, to go into Blackstone Valley, to start explorer programs, to do all of this stuff to bring more people in. It's being done in many municipalities in the Commonwealth. There are departments, the Holliston Fire Department has 59 call members and 12 people on a waiting list. You know how many Grafton has on the waiting list? Zippo. None. Station 2 used to have 25 people on it. 20 full-time people, 20 regular firefighters, and 5 auxiliary. They have 14. We have more trucks than people to put on them. This is serious. And we need to add $418,500 to an override to the budget, not in fiscal year 23 or 22, now. It's got to be done now. It's so important to get it done now. Because otherwise, in fiscal year 23, there will be 10 more people off the fire department. Then what are we going to do? Then people are going to be calling for full-time fire department. How do you put a full-time fire department in the town of Grafton? You have 3 stations. You have 11 trucks. How many do you put on? The budget goes from $600,000 to $3 million in a heartbeat. I'm asking for $418,000 to start the ball rolling. Thank you.
Tim, just could I ask you to address that last point that he made? In the sheet that we have, we're looking at 333,000 FY '21 out of this override, 100,000 and $150. Of those 3 numbers, how much of those is going to the fire department staffing?
In year one,
If you could do each year, in year 1 first.
130, 110, 100.
Okay.
I mean, we're looking at the inspector position to be a rank position in command staff. Remember, you have a study, very lengthy. You have a committee that's made iterative recommendations. I don't necessarily want to prescribe what the staffing is for a department that we're really building from the ground up. I think a chief has to be here first to determine what the best use of the resources are. As much as we want to take solace and take direction from the committee that's reviewing that recommendation, the chief can't just, he has a chance to build it, the person we pick. That's what makes it so unique, because there's going to be a transition period to keep retention, training, recruitment happening. So the chief is the first thing. That's why it's first. If we want to add more sooner, we can, but that first person is the most important piece.
So, so I guess the questions we have to answer is how much? That's the first thing. Do we want the capital piece in it or not? And the timing. So let's start with the amount. I'm hearing that some think it should be more. How much more and what is that based on? We wouldn't know that exactly. But again, does any, Laura, do you have any?
Can I say
Did
something?
Yeah.
I just want to put an idea out there. If we were to go for a higher number in May and not get it, then we could come back at a lower number in October. Just an idea to consider. Not saying we have to decide that this moment, just something to keep in mind.
Yes?
Well, the capital is important. I know the school's gonna be doing a study. I think the number that you need for operational expenses over the next 5 years is a 3.2 million for operational expenses. So if I were to make a recommendation to you, I would say go for $3.2 million operational override. Gives the schools a little bit more, meet some of the fire department needs to help the new chief plan. And then you can always come back in the fall or next year with a capital number, because that will give the CIPC and the administration a chance to work with the schools over the next year, once you get that study done, to figure out exactly what your capital needs are. So my recommendation to the board is a $3.2 million override in May to fund operation over the next 5 years.
So that's $1 million more than they requested.
Correct.
Jay, do you have an idea what the delta might be between the funding we're giving you and something like a 5% bump per year?
No, you wouldn't spend it all right now.
Yeah, I can give you a little bit information. Just ran a few numbers, scenarios. We don't think we would want 5 every year. That's a lot over. In Mark's scenario, $1 million more would be 5% in FY21, and then 4.5% out. That would be around 300,000 more in FY23, 24, and 25 in each year.
Okay.
There's if you were to do something like 5%, 4.5 in FY22, and then 4 out, that would add another 400,000 to the school department. And to reiterate what Jay says, we think we can get by with what we've presented. An additional, for example, $400,000 at 5, 4.4, 4.5, and then 4 going out. That's a little bit higher than the current, around 0.2 more each year. That would add 400,000, so that would be a lot of wiggle room, I think, for teaching positions, if tuitions came in, things like that. But I think 5, would be more than we would need. But
so you're saying 5, 4.5, 4, 4, 4?
Yeah. So the current is 4.7, 4.3, and then 3.8. So bumping that up to 4.
Okay.
The 5% in the first year would allow us to keep, those other 2 positions that are being cut. We wouldn't cut any positions in FY21.
Okay.
Part of the $1 million too addresses something that Mr. Mead said in terms of fire department needs,
Right.
too, not all for the schools.
Right.
That's how I get to my $3.2 million.
That's a good point.
Wait, are you just talking about the first option, Mark, the 3.3? It's not the one they recommended, but the first option is 3.3 in year 1. That's what I'm seeing. And I would like to know why the first option is not recommended. Like, what was the justification behind recommending the second option, which I believe is 2.2?
I thought they said to try to keep the override as low as possible. I think that was what
Yeah.
her presentation was.
Okay.
Did I
Again, it's a
misunderstand
balance.
that?
We have to balance what we feel like the community can afford and is going to support. So we have to have the numbers to back it. And if we're going to go out and ask the community to support this, we were brought forth a recommendation of something that the school committee and the town staff felt like would help and would be a good amount for the next 5 years, and but also keeping in mind the entire community. So we have to balance things, and yes, money is needed, but I think that we need to also remember that there are people paying for this override. So, yes.
Thank you. I just have a question. If we did take the capital component out or apply the capital to the operating, could we then apply all the marijuana money in to capital instead? Just dedicate all marijuana tax money to capital and let the operating just go operating?
That is something that can be done, sure.
So now we have a revenue source that's not stabilization, keeps the number down, but helps boost the operating side a little more.
Yeah,
And
but
you're
what
not asking
happens
for more.
if the override does not pass? We still need that operational
There's a
money.
lot of what ifs if the override doesn't pass, but this is just another
Yeah.
opportunity to think about.
Tim, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but can you earmark taxable money to the town for a specific program? Very much to what Mr. Roy had mentioned.
Property taxes?
Well, you're talking about the cannabis money from the businesses, okay? So can you earmark that very much to what Mr. Roy said?
I think Millbury did something like that with the home rule petition. I'm not familiar with it, but, you know, it can be a committed policy of the select board to bring it to town meeting in that fashion.
Okay, thank you.
You would just designate a portion of the budget each year of the levy towards the capital. So you'd say $300,000 every year is gonna be appropriated for capital, and that could be the marijuana money. So whatever the estimate for the marijuana is, when you raise the budget, that's the amount of money that you would set aside for capital, following what Colleen said.
I would feel comfortable with that. Look, we have to do something with capital. That's, you know, it's a growing backlog. If we don't do something, it's gonna continue growing, and it's growing at a, you know, more rapid pace every single year. So we've gotta do something on that. And the idea that we would pass an override just for our operating expenses and then come back with another one, I just don't support that. I think we have to figure out what the town needs, and we have to be able to be comfortable with what we're asking for, and confident that we need it, and that we're not asking too much.
Tim, every $1 million of override money represents how much added to the average tax bill? $1.51?
Yeah, 151.
Okay.
Based on value, there's an average single-family tax bill.
Okay.
So I think that this idea that we have to kind of guess at what people are willing to accept for an override kind of gets back to my idea of doing something higher in May and then trying again with a lower number a second time. If the community does have an appetite for that larger override, then if we don't go for it, we'll never know. But if we try for it in May and people aren't willing to accept that, then we know, and we can come back with something. We can say we heard you, we listened, and we want to run this more modest proposal by it. That's why I think that's doing something in May gives us at least that opportunity.
Laura?
I hear you about May, and I mean, I like it. I mean, October, we were trying to come up with kind of a compromise. We were moving a little slower. So my concern was that this was gonna get pushed back to next May. And I definitely do not wanna be here next January having the same discussion again. So October seemed like a interesting thought to talk about, to give a lot of time to educate, because what I've learned in the community is people aren't as caught up as we are. They haven't been living it day to day, and they've needed to be educated. My concern on that, Dan, is if you're coming to me, we'd have to really sell why it's so much better to have, if we need this amount of money, then we need this amount of money. Why would I vote for something that's gonna be higher when I know you're gonna come back to me in a couple months for lower and we're gonna get by? Like, I would be like, I'll just wait till October.
I agree with you.
I mean, not to say,
I agree with you.
I think a
I
lot of
agree with you
people
100%.
want the stuff that's being cut in the lower proposal, though.
but I want, if we're coming up with a number, for me, I want it to be able to believe it, because I'm gonna be out there selling it, and I wanna say, hey, we need this. I can't live in the schools without what we have, or we need the fire. I mean, Ray, I'm not on the select board, I'm all in with Ray and the fire. Like, I'll vote for that, and I'll want to pay for that. I wouldn't want to say, hey, we're gonna try something high, but we'll be back in October for low, because I would just wait for the sale.
Can I speak to the October thing real quick?
I think Donna was next.
Sure, sorry.
So I obviously was involved on the school committee when we did the last override, and I would actually recommend the October 2020. And one of the reasons I've said this, and I've said it on other occasions, several of us met with Senior Center the other day, and you said something that day that really struck me. Your daughter was having some level of service, and what you were fighting for was your son to have the same level of service going forward. And I had 4 children, They were in the Grafton School District for 20 consecutive years. For 18 of those years, my kids did not have the same service the subsequent year. So the classes behind always had something less than what the previous class did. So all 4 of my children went through that situation, as a lot of people did in this community. And it was art in the cart. It was trying to find every single square inch that we could stuff somebody in as we just grew out of proportion. So we had 18 years where we were advocating for new school space, and we were defeated the first time around, came back with a second one, and then had to come back for the third time for a building when we went with the high school. So that the public was educated. There were public forums that were hosted not just by the boards, but by outside entities, and a lot of information was there. And I think that's why we got that first override done in a short period of time. It was probably about a 6 months, so it was a quick turnaround, maybe less. And that was unheard of. I don't think anybody really thought that we would really get it on the first time, because a lot of the other area communities hadn't done it. So that's why I think we need the education piece that you just mentioned. I think we heard that the seniors the other day, they were adamant about the fact that their taxes couldn't go up anymore. They were living on fixed incomes, and they had a concern. So I think I'm thinking of that. I think, it's difficult, but I agree with Ray. We have to include the Fire Safety Commission's recommendations in our proposal going forward. I think that was a successful model the last time when we paired the roads with the schools, and I'd like to do the fire with the schools. But we talk about all the cuts that have been made on the school side. They have benefited over the past 6 years. I think the municipal side has also taken some hits. So I think we have to be really examining this and making certain that when we go forward, we're going forward with a united front to the entire community with what we need, why we need it, and what's going to happen because of it.
Well, I think that's why we're here, though. So, as you recall from being a part of Yes Grafton 6 years ago, we started Yes Grafton this week 6 years ago. And as you recall, Donna, that project went nowhere for a good 2 months. We didn't have any money. At first, we had about 70 people in a room, all wanted to talk about what the slogan was. And then once we got past the slogan, we started talking about mailers and making phone calls and sending emails and raising money. We didn't raise any money, so our numbers dwindled. And by the end of it, it was like 6 people sitting around a table going, oh my God, what do we do? This vote is coming up. By the end of it, once we had determined what the message was and once we had determined what the strategy was, the outreach was incredible. We had a really strong group of volunteers that built back up that were committed around a cause. And they weren't committed around a cause because they thought the number was affordable. When we were talking about people who were first-time homeowners, people who had small children, people who were in their first jobs right out of college, and coming out, door knocking with older, more established veterans in the community, and saying, yes, raise my taxes too. Not because they like spending money or not being able to afford things, but because they had a vision of what the schools could be. Now, that vision isn't going to be furthered by going for an override in October. There's no upside to it. Once you go for an override in October, you're well past FY21. We waved the white flag on FY21. Then you're into talking about planning for FY22. By mid-October, Tim's talking to his department heads. They're starting to put the preliminary numbers for a budget together. We don't know what free cash is going to be back from the state yet. We haven't got the cherry sheet back or whatever. And so then we're talking about, okay, we'll go to the voters with an override proposal, but we really don't know what FY22 is going to look like, but we think it's going to look bad. So maybe they tell us, well, go wait until FY22. And then we're back with what Laura's saying is, okay, now it's FY22. Things are going to be really, really bad this year, we promise. And then you have the cynical voter who says, yeah, but you told us that last year. I didn't see it change. My life didn't change. And then we're talking about FY23. I think we can leave this room tonight with a committed voice and a committed vision on a number. I think reasonable minds can differ about what the public thinks is palatable. Is it, 4.2 a year? Is it 3.2 a year for an extra $151 per average taxpayer? That's not that much difference. I am sensitive to the people who are on fixed incomes, and we were there in the senior center the other day, and we got hammered, for those watching at home, and rightly so. It's a scary thing to live on a fixed income and not understand or feel like you're not in control of where this is all going. But those same people had those same concerns last time. All we can do is the best we can to balance this for everybody in the community, provide people who need abatements and people who need tax relief with that tax relief, and encourage them to apply for it. A lot of people don't out of pride. and we want to change that, and maybe we need more outreach for that. But I think everybody in this room recognizes that based on the data, unquestionably there is a need for an override right now that doesn't go away by waiting till October. Which, by the way, as Ray said, it's a good point. If you know you need it, go for it. You can't halfway do this. All we can do is, with a unified voice, say we support this. Go for a vote between now and June. We can do it the same way we did it last time. It could be June 14th or whatever that Saturday is in June this year. We put it on the ballot in May and then do it with a unified voice and say we support this. That's what we need to do.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So, my concern is that we're here in August.
Right.
Honestly, the schools need level funding. The shortfall in being able to fund the schools at level funding has been in the projections for years. This is no surprise. We know that this has to happen. We've got some great options. We have everybody in the room. I think we should just agree on a number and move forward.
I agree. I think waiting till October so that we can reach out to the community. We had more than 500 people take the Super Park survey that was online for about 2 weeks. People are paying attention. People know we've been talking about this since January and that we've been saying how serious this is and just putting it off just so we can do more community outreach. I think people are listening and they want to see answers.
People are showing up to finance committee meetings, making comments.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that, but it never happened.
I'll say we had sorry to interrupt, I've been on for 6 years, I've never had people come to our public hearing on our budget before.
Right.
This time
I was on it for 10 years and never
We
had it.
did, and they were great, they were well-informed, great questions. And we've done, one thing that we've done differently, and I was gonna add too, it came up in my Facebook memories that I went to that meeting in the library as a concerned citizen, and I was like, oh, well, we did start this time in March. We also, life is very different now than it was. I mean, as good and bad as it is, social media really does help us outreach, where I don't think we had as much engagement on social media in Grafton, where we can reach a larger person. I mean, I'm a communications person. I'm not concerned too much about that. I think basically, and because I feel like this October idea is now kind of setting us back, and I'm sorry about that, because it was just an idea, and frankly, it was an idea that finally got us all talking and making kind of decisions, which wasn't happening. So I'm like, I wish I hadn't, I mean, it was kind of, I brought it up to Jen because it had been brought up to me, and it was just a suggestion. Again, I just want this passed, and I hope everybody who's saying we want to move to May, if it gets to May, is going to be out there advocating with me, because we need help, and we can't do it alone. So I just need that.
All right, we have somebody in the audience.
Somebody.
Hi, Bruce Spinney. I'm also familiar with how we handled the last one. The timing is almost identical to what we conducted the last time. The conversations you're having here are virtually identical to the conversations we were having the last time. The last time there was a little bit more structure on how it was going to be set. We had a contingency budget that was ready to go when we were having this conversation, which wouldn't be that hard to do. And then we gave ourselves a couple iterations of what would happen if that override did indeed fail. It was our first one, and we had no assumptions that we were going to pass it. Matter of fact, most of us thought that it was not going to pass because most towns don't pass. So when we were talking about it, and we had a contingency budget, we gave ourselves 90 days to prove that contingency budget. So we could have come back at a later override, which you had to have a certain space in between them because you had to advertise and things of that nature, to pass just to get us through that contingency budget, which would have been a reserve of how we did that. So you're not far off. May is when we handle our finances in town. It's the way we've always handled our finances in town. If you're going to get the most people at a town meeting to discuss this, it's going to be in May. You can track the last 20 years. It's very easy to do. Your May town meetings are when we always handle these type of things, and they always are fairly well attended compared to October. It doesn't take long to do outreach. At that time, the actual finance committee, the select board, and the school committee, the advocacy group was very much different from the composite that was there making the decision on the number. And then they went forward with it. There was no official public comments. There was no survey that was sent out to determine what people could or couldn't afford. We were all anecdotal like this conversation is now. You have no real idea outside of just talking to a couple people. You know, if you do put that list together and try to come up with some statistical evidence that would support something which way or the other. You have a number that says Jay can get by for 5 years on, that's your number. If you go lower, then start making the cuts now. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about a number that supports it. So where you're going with the number, I just been sitting listening for a while, and I'm trying to understand, you know, what's going to change here. So it's, if Jay and Tim are coming and saying this is your scenarios, pick one of the scenarios and go with it. If it's recommended that's the second one, pick the number and go, because the second one provides everything you're going to need to make sure you don't go into that imminent collapse phase. And we talked about that the last time too. There was a nice little graph that showed us what level of funding meant what to the school system. And then when we looked at the additional capital that we wanted to put there, which constituted that 5.25, 5 was to keep level service, which a little bit of contingency in it, and 0.25 was spent to grow the budget in some way, shape, or form. I know all those things kind of change as you go along, but that's what we ended up with. And then we had a vote, and it was successful. And not only was it successful, but it was overwhelmingly successful. So the only true depiction you have in this town of what the general populace likes and doesn't like is with a ballot question. You have 200 people that show up on average to a Springtown meeting. That sets your 60-something million dollar budget. And you had 36 some odd people show up for an override vote, which, by the way, is only a third of your voting populace in town. So you won by 800 votes that time on the number that you picked. That was done in May with very minimal uptime. And as long as the boards agree on the number and can tell the public this number does this, then they have a decision that they can make. And it's not too hard, and it's the public's responsibility to get involved in this particular piece at this point now. You know, you put it out there, you advertise for it. It's up to the people to come and say, do we support X number for X reasons that they gave us from these TRICOM meetings? So pushing it off to October makes absolutely no sense to me at all. You're dwindling in support. There would be no extra effort that would be made between now and then to devise another means in which to advocate for this that you wouldn't have now. The capital program as it is now, there was a wonderful capital plan that was demonstrated last October at town meeting that got completely poo-pooed. And now we're talking about coming the next year and spending $1 million of people to go into a stabilization fund to fund just capital. The idea is preposterous to me. So if you think you're going to get that done between now and October, you're not, because you never have. So if you have a number for operation, go with it. If you have to consider the fire department, roll the fire department into it, and at least have that levy capacity. It's up to the select board to sign off on how much you go to that levy ceiling. I mean, it's a simple number. You just move it around. You need X amount because spring sets the town meeting budget. You levy to that with the additional that's there. And then the next year you keep going. And you hope it lasts for 5 years. But this is not an exact science. You know, as it's been alluded to about 100 times, you got an over $60 million budget, there's always going to be wiggle room in there. So you have to have it in there. So that being said, a little bit earlier we talked about, do you mind if I go back just for a point of clarification?
Sure. If you have a question, go ahead.
I do. Just when we're talking about the cannabis money and the 360 and stuff like that, there was never general policy that we came up with on how we were going to spend that money. So it's different money. It's not tax revenue money per se. It's very similar to stuff that comes back into the general fund, like meals tax, which we did, or the bag fees, which we did. So there was never an actual discussion about it, and perhaps that needs to happen. For now, it's kind of being used as a shortfall for an operational budget when we're talking about an override. It's an industry that nobody in here seems to understand, and nobody in here has, you know, provided a lot of data for me or out here sitting out in the community to understand what you're even talking about. Now, for me, I have a little bit of insider knowledge on this, and that leaves me with the position that you really don't know when this money's coming in. It is going to come in. There are people that are going to succeed in the town and sell cannabis in town, and you're going to make 3% off the sales tax and 3% off the host agreement. The host agreement money is going to go away in 5 years. So, and maybe sooner, maybe not. So if you're following the legislation in the State House, they're giving control over host community agreements over to the CCC. And that's probably going to pass the Senate as well. And by the way, by a fairly significant margin. So how that even looks, I don't know. And nobody in this industry is going to be able to tell you that. So that's about all I have. I'm sorry that was a question, but I just, you talked about the 360 and how you're going to find it. And then Jay's talking about letting a teacher go that you really want to replace in October. Why not just put that in a contingency budget so you don't have to make the layoff to begin with and do your override in May, just like we did last time and just like we did successfully last time. Because when all things are considered, we're batting 1,000 on our operational overrides. So, and you just don't know until you actually try, because there's no evidence that you're going to be able to provide over the next couple of months that's going to be able to discern what people actually have or need to know. You know, because I know people come to budget meetings, but, you know, you got 20 people here, maybe. That's 0.001% of your voting populace. You probably got some people, you know, watching at home. There's no real evidence that you're going to provide until you actually go to the ballot. And people aren't even going to pay attention to this until they read it in the newspaper that you're going to the ballot. So, because we only hit 1,200, 1,500 people on a regular basis when we talk. To go beyond that actually takes you getting in their face and saying, this is what we're doing. Because they're not going to come to the table. So, that's all I have to say. You guys are doing great. I love the fact that everybody's here. It's fantastic.
Jay, do you want to go back to your, in your memo, you know, go through your recommendations and how you came up, you know, the number and the timing? Why did you recommend October? Just to remind us.
On the school side, it was simply looking back. Again, we talked a lot about in FY14 where we had fairly strong agreement from the three boards in, I believe it was in March, and a clear plan. So bottom line, on the school end, or myself as superintendent, I want to obviously avoid, I'm concerned about 21, but it's really 22 and beyond, and I want to maximize from our end, it has to pass or we're going to fall apart.
Okay, so
if that took more time for planning and advocating, great. October isn't ideal, but if that's what it took to communicate it well, to increase the chances of it passing, that's why I was supportive of that.
So so 21, you're stretching. We're stretching the same old override, and you feel like 21 you can stretch it to cover enough, and 22 is where it really becomes.
Yeah,
the
like
issue.
basically, if you know, I love a metaphor, but if you're walking to the bathroom in the middle of the night, 21 is stepping on a Lego. 22 through 26 is falling down a flight of stairs.
It's quite
Just to be clear, you're saying October isn't ideal. If you had
Oh,
your
no,
choice,
God,
it
no.
would be May.
No, let's just
If you
wave a
had a choice.
magic wand and say they both pass. It would be the biggest no-brainer ever to have it in May.
Okay.
On the school side, of
Just to be
course.
clear.
Oh yeah,
Right, but we have to get it passed.
right, correct.
But if
But if we don't even ask, it won't pass at all in May.
There's
Right.
no data to suggest that October is better than May for this. None
Right.
whatsoever.
So I think we just have to make a decision and then ask, right?
seems to me you're at the same time frame as you were in 2014.
Yeah,
Didn't you
there's-
just say,
It was in June, not May, it was
Mark,
June.
so call the election in June?
It's the exact same time frame. It's almost an exact overlay of the calendar. It's the exact same thing.
You're not gonna get any advocacy done in June, July, and August when everybody's on vacation and out of town anyway. So you're not going to get the word out there any faster or any better with 1 month in September to the October town meeting. So it only makes sense to me that we do this in May, because we've got like 9 or 10 weeks to get this message out.
The other thing
And
is too,
everyone's been watching.
it's bad optics. I mean, Bruce is right. You get the most people at Maytown meeting. All anyone ever needs is an excuse to say no to a tax increase. There are going to be people out there that we're not going to get anyway because it's taxes. But all people need is to say, oh, well, they're trying to put one by us. They know we're going to show up for Maytown meeting. 60 people show up for October. You know that's what we're going to hear. Avoid it. You know, go right into it. Invite people to this. Get people out. Pro, con, whatever. Go to the big town meeting.
You set
Go to the big one.
you set the operating budget in May.
Yep.
Right.
You
that's
should
what
base
it is.
everything
Yeah,
based on you set the operating budget in May. You do not set the operating budget in October. You adjust the operating budget in October.
Yep.
But you set the operating budget in May, and people are used, it's an annual town election.
That's our process.
That's our process. So I don't understand the October date. Makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever.
Done.
I've heard enough. I agree with you. I mean, if we're ready to do, if we've got the message to deliver and the information that's gonna go out, then go for it.
Good. Let's get on the same page. Let's get the number.
Right, yeah,
Or
sorry.
Dawn,
It's
sorry.
okay. We mentioned something a little while ago. Mark had brought up doing capital separate from the override, and I actually agree with Matt. I think that adding the capital is important. So I just want us to keep in mind, if we do this in May, talking about the investment grade audit, I'm curious on, how that's going to affect capital for next year, what kind of, decision we're going to make, if there's an estimate that we know, that would, that's a fluctuating number that I'd like just a little more information about if we have any. Because I would like to include capital.
Yeah,
And then-
Madam Chair, 1 minute. I was on CIPC since its inception, and I can assure you right now that even adding another million on top of the 1 million that we get out of free cash when we're lucky, when we get that 1 million, is still not going to be enough. All's that study is going to do is prioritize and put price tags on things. We're still going to have the problem. So I'm in favor of the audit, by the way. I'm not saying like we shouldn't do it, but I don't think that that's going to make or change what the outcome would be in order to deal with the liabilities that we have going forward.
Madam Chair, another concern that I have about not putting money into the capital stabilization account is we have the same needs, and year after year we are increasingly dealing with emergency situations. We're going to be very soon in a situation where, on top of an override, we're also going to be going to town meeting after town meeting asking for a debt excluded bond for a roof. And I would rather include that and say this is what we're going to deliver, and not have to have another thing that we have to have people say, oh my God, they're raising our taxes again. Why haven't we dealt with the roofs and all the other things in town? So talking through it with the taxpayers, I think it's a much better idea to include some. I don't know if $1 million is the right thing.
Yeah,
We have
I
to
don't-
talk about what our priorities are. Ray spoke so passionately about the fire. He sort of moved me into his column of, so maybe we have a little bit less with capital, but we should be doing something.
Dan, did you want to say something? You standing?
Yeah, so I think, and Becca said, like, I think we're still gonna have 2 million plus of capital needs throughout the years. This might change the prioritization of things.
Right.
This program would focus on, we have HVAC units, we need to replace the middle school, some univents, some other building envelope projects. So it could reduce the backlog, but there's still more than enough backlog that we would still be spending more than 2 million per year. And I agree with what Peter said as well.
Thank you.
Tim, can you just, moving the fire positions, if they were moved up in the scenarios, it's still the same amount of total override. It's just that,
levy to the limit quicker.
right. Okay, I just wanted to.
So, Madam Chair, maybe we can go through just kind of everything that's been discussed and agree, schools number, capital number, fire number. Does that-
Well, it's just to reframe one thing, operating number, capital number.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so let's start with the operating number. So,
Yep,
the
I
operating
like it.
number that was recommended to us by, town staff, both, the school department and town administrator's office was 2.2. So, how do we feel about that number? I heard some people think it's too low.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would like to start. So, although I commend trying to be as conservative and close as possible and trying to keep that cost down, I do believe that backs the town into a corner without having some versatility. So, in essence, if we went with that number, then I would say we're going to be back here guaranteed in 5 years. If we choose another number tonight, where it may be larger, maybe we get 7-8 years out of this, and depending upon how fiscal things align with the state, if they follow through with their promises and so on and so forth, then we get some more money. Maybe we even prolong that even further, so we're not having conversations and people in public saying, this is going to happen in 5 years. So I'm in favor of a larger number, and I'm not sure if you guys can do some back of the napkin calculations for me, but I would like to see something go out to 7 years, and maybe take what, Mr. Prisby had mentioned about that 5% for 5 years, but make that stretch out 7 years, not at 5%, but whatever that number would have been for 5 years for your part of the budget, and extend it out by 7 years. So you wouldn't be getting 5% every year. It would be, still like the 4.7, 3.8 like you were projecting, but we can go further out. That's my recommendation on the operation side of things, and also including, I think we already included the fire department's number in the bottom line. So the only thing I'm looking to adjust is what the school will be requesting more than 5 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right, anybody else? So you want to pause while they do those calculations, or?
Well, I think everyone else could talk. I think they're just gonna do a quick calculation. They should be able to do it like that, so. Come on, Dan. Come on, Dan.
Dan can do it.
Dan.
Dan the man. Please, do you really think he didn't have those numbers?
He already had them.
Of course he did.
So I have projections out to FY 27, so we would, one second, let me scroll over. FY 26, we would be requesting around 450,000 and another 450,000 FY 27. The same kind of theory of level service.
So that would be an additional 900.
So yeah, so that would be around the 3.8% kind of continuing, like we are showing right now.
So 900. So
900,000.
add that, so it's 3.2 total, not cap.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's the number I said before.
3.2.
3.2?
But without capital.
Right, and so.
Yeah, but I apologize. I didn't mean to offend anybody with the capital. I just listening to what the chair said about people's ability to pay. And if we set the number that we think people can afford, 3.2 is the priority, more operating than it is capital. But it seems to me that if it's 3.2, then maybe you ask for $4 million in the override, put $800,000 towards capital, and then maybe use some of that marijuana money to bridge the gap up to $1 million for capital moving forward. I think 4 million is the number you want to think about right now.
Yeah,
I think you're
I
right.
would support You're that. right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Does that include the fire?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because they would just move them.
The 400,
Just move it up.
500.
Yeah, okay. Just, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, does anybody have any other discussion on the 4 million? Is there anybody in the audience that wanted to say anything? I'd see some hands, but then they'd go down, so.
Madam Chair. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, we have somebody coming up.
Hi, I'm Allison Brissett, live on Lakeview Drive. So my main thing is to just get it on the ballot for May as well, and so I just wanted to reiterate what some of the people were saying was that there are a lot of people like myself who have been following along but have not been very engaged up until we started to hear more about it. And so I do think that more and more people are engaged than you may think. I appreciate that you all sat down with the seniors recently. Obviously, they're a great or a valued constituent group that will be needed to get the override passed. But you did not also sit down with young parents who are in the school districts. And so you haven't heard from us yet either, really, unless you're coming to these meetings. So I just wanted to be the voice for some people who aren't showing up, but who are engaged, and to reiterate that May is the time frame. And yeah, that's my big thing, time frame. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just want to reiterate, Tim, that this also includes the replacement of the assistant planner, the custodian, and your full-time.
Yeah, the restoring of those 3 positions will still be in that number that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Okay, Barry?
The school number includes or excludes the student fees for activities?
Includes.
Yep, it's already included. We haven't set the actual rate yet, but we built in about 60,000 in fees.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, so we have the 4 million, 1 million of capital, 3 million of operating? Is that, or, sorry, 3.2 and 800.
Madam
Yep.
Chair, I just have
Yes.
one more clarification on fire. So Ray had mentioned 418,500, which would include, according to the study in the committee, a fire with 2 captains. One would be an inspector, one would be for recruitment, retention, and training. Is that correct? Correct. The SAFER grant is fire captain, lieutenant. Little less amount in the budget. So
We're gonna ask for as much as we think we can get approved for
Okay.
from the grant, which would cover those positions and we wouldn't need the tax levy to pay for it.
okay.
But again, if we wanna do them all at once, you would use more of that 4 million earlier than you would have otherwise.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure that's covered. Thank you.
Yeah.
Donna?
Just to continue, I think you mentioned 130, 110, and 100 for the salaries going forward, and that comes up to 340 versus the 418.
Right.
Yeah.
So the 418,500 is 140,000 for a chief, $85,000 for the 2 captains, and that includes benefits.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's not just their salaries.
Got it.
Oh, okay, okay.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
So we're clear on numbers of what we're carrying?
Yeah.
We're carrying 130 for a chief, just because we think that is probably the market. 100 for the fire captain, 100 for the lieutenant. There's benefits baked into those numbers, so we need to, we gotta provide for
Okay.
those pieces too. So that total 380 is what has to kind of cover and sustain, whether it's a year 1 or year 1, 2, and 3.
But you guys aren't talking about different personnel. I think that was my
No,
concern.
no,
is-
we're not.
Okay.
Me too. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Anything else? So we have the amount, we have, I'm hearing May. Jay?
Can I clarify one thing, and you guys may be way ahead of me on this. We had talked about it come up having that margin above and something above and beyond pure level service, and maybe that's already been figured out. But we were just doing some rough math. If we were to build in 0.25% of our overall 1% of our budget, so an additional quarter percentage to what we laid out and put before the committee tonight, that would equate to an average of about 120,000 additional dollars that would give that flexibility, if you will. Not a great deal, but there's flexibility there. Over the 5 years, that would total 611,000.
That's about where we're at.
That's
Okay.
That's how I
I'm
came up
just
with the
making
number I
sure before you
recommended.
set the number and blame me.
It's early.
We might anyway.
I said just one more.
One more question, go ahead.
I think we're talking the June timeframe to vote. I think that gives us the opportunity at town meeting to, once again, educate people, and there has to be that 2 part of it. It's got to be the town meeting as well as the ballot, so.
So would you delay the annual election till June?
No.
You would have 2 votes, why
Then you
wouldn't
have 1 vote before the town meeting has even had an opportunity.
Isn't the election after the town meeting?
Yeah.
Right, so
It is.
the
that's
the
good.
bylaw, if I understand the bylaw, it gives you the flexibility to set the election date sometime in May. It doesn't have to be that Tuesday, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but I think they have the flexibility, it has to be sometime in May, so you can set the date later if you want a little bit more time. I think trying to bring voters out for an annual election in May and then an override election in June, I would do them both at the same time. Just
Yeah.
seems to make sense to do it that way.
We got them last time.
Maximizes
right.
turnout
Maximizes
to
turnout.
me.
We could do it, yeah.
You know, like,
What
you want
does
the
the bylaw
most
say?
representative.
Gives them the right to set it.
Yeah,
Population voting.
they can set it at any time.
Yeah.
Anytime they want.
It saves money.
Then it works.
Yeah, why pay for 2 elections?
Well, and it gives your voters the most kind of powerful voice, right? They're gonna have their say, because you'll have the most out.
Yeah, we have somebody coming up to the podium.
I wasn't going to add this in, and then I hear it kind of going back to the time frame and everything, and I just thought I wanted to add this little anecdote because it was kind of interesting. While I was sitting in the audience, I got a call from a client that I've been working on a project with today, and so I was talking to him out in the hall. Happened to know he used to be on the school committee in Reading, and I said, "So have you guys ever had this problem where you were trying to figure out the timing? When I know you talked about putting an override on the ballot and that you had a successful one after having one fail. How did the timing work for you?" And he said, "Oh, well, it was great. We had a meeting about the same time of the year, about in March. We put an override on the ballot in April. The 3 boards came together. We're all on the same page, worked hard,
and we got it passed, and it was great. It was very successful, and it was, I think, a $4.1 million override or something. So they're really, that was really excited. It was a good story out of a town that had had one fail before. So I think if you guys are still kind of worried about the timing, I think we can do it. But I hope, it sounds like people have been very nice and cooperative this evening. I hope to keep seeing that, and I hope that all the committee members, that all you guys, and I'm out there. I'm ready and willing to go and to work on this and to get this passed too. So I hope that we can all come together and get it passed in May.
Who are you, Liz?
I'm Elizabeth Spinney.
Greg?
There's always one in every.
Go ahead, Greg.
Greg Moore. I just checked the bylaws. Does set the date of the election to be the third Tuesday in May.
Doesn't give the selectmen flexibility to change it?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The annual town election
my
for
town
election
confused.
town officers shall be held on the third Tuesday in May of each year.
I think that still gives you enough time if you.
For election of officers, correct.
That's my
Not
husband.
set a ballot question in town for the purpose of an override.
Right, we were just thinking if we could match the two up, so you'd have to do two things, but, yeah.
That'll help Candy, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It's just like we're trying to save every penny. Like if we do 2 elections within a month, it just
Doesn't make sense.
I got the same
because they're what,
comments
10 grand
in
each.
14 when we did that too, and I was kind of like, yeah, we should have probably done it in May, and lesson learned. But we're having the same discussion that we haven't back in 14, so I find this very interesting. So, just want to let you know that, Eric.
I think you have enough time to do it at the May election.
I was just gonna say, I think when we had talked talking about planning and outreach, one of the things that was very powerful was the 3 boards. I remember going to the high school, and we committed to being at the high school to answer questions. We did a lot of we didn't. The boards did a lot of community outreach together. So I would look to be a partner with all of you to do that again, to go and be very visible in the community and asking questions and connecting with. I'm sure that there's an advocacy group ready to go, connecting with them throughout the community. We went to preschools, we went to the parks, we had house parties, but people were very available. Peter and Donna, I think, are the only members that were on board.
Soup.
You were running.
And so then I went to one.
Yeah,
the night after
I was
elected.
running too,
Yeah.
and then we went, I'm sorry.
'Cause it wasn't until
I forgot
June.
it was June, yeah, so
Yeah.
Jen, we went and went after, so, thank you, sorry. So anyway, I would look to do that again, and I'm sure everybody would be with me on that.
Yep.
Well,
Reach everybody, like Allison said, of course, we're gonna hit those schools.
Just a quick question, if everybody's in the room right now, setting a date for something like that, is that possible to do tonight too? So not only just have a number, but let everybody know, come out to this night and we can talk about it more? Is that
When's the
possible?
Well,
town
we have to schedule a room and
Oh, okay.
all that
Yeah.
sort of thing. We have to make sure it's available and
did
check
that.
with the school and.
I'm just excited to get started.
Yeah, we can still do it, Colleen, I mean, we have a voice.
We will set a date. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not hard. We'll do it. So I'm hearing a 4.0 on May 19th. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Any other pieces that we need to talk about in order to do
Number
it?
with operation and capital, and you're going for the May regular election.
Okay,
Is
those
that
are,
right?
that's what it sounds like.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it though, right? There's no other
3, 2, and
component.
800.
3, 2, and 8.
3, 2, and
Yeah.
8, yep.
3, 2, and 800?
How many years?
The year we were, it depends on if it's a 7-year or adding, it sounds like the 7-year, if we do that, it'll be similar to if we do the 5-year plus the 2.25%.
Yeah, so if we go up to the 3 million, it could either stretch us to 7 years, or it could give us what we asked for plus 0.25 for the 5 years.
So that can be an annual decision every year, depending on what the needs are in that particular year. You could have a year where revenues could increase, and you can do that 0.25 without hitting the levy because you're gonna have more marijuana money or more safer grant money or whatever. But I think my proposal was 3.2 plus 8, which covers the 5-year projection, which you may be able to stretch to 7 years. That's where my recommendation was from.
Yep. Okay, now that we've gotten a yes. Anything else?
What's next?
I need a motion.
just select board, just to.
Are we doing the motion tonight, or is?
No, it's not on our agenda,
Yeah, it's just
but
discussion.
it's discussion, but I have no problem making a motion if the chair would accept it.
I would accept
Okay.
it.
Madam Chair, I motion that we set a ballot question for an override in the amount of $4 million, May 17th, 2020.
19.
I'm sorry, May 19th, 2020.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Three of them.
Three of them.
All right. So it's competition. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carried. All right. I have
Motion to adjourn.
motion. Do I have a
Second.
All right. We are adjourned. We're all in favor? Aye.